When he shows up,
we got 10 seconds. Oh, I'm turning my phone off.
We on?
Yep.
Oh, good day. Hey, Facebook. Welcome to the Veterans Impact Show, where our motto is Charlie Mike. Continue the mission. I'm your host, Jim Blythe, U.S. Navy Vietnam veteran and certified senior advisor. Join me as we feature veterans who continue the mission of leadership and commitment in our communities after serving our great nation. Why, you never know who you're going to meet or where we're going to go. So welcome aboard. Hey, this is Jim Blythe. I'm your host. I want to welcome Cedric White. Cedric is my new co-host, partner, and I got to tell you, he is an amazing marriage counselor, Navy veteran, minister. And you know what? Cedric has asked me to preach in his church. I'm so excited about that. So I get to not only do the invocation, but I get to talk a little bit. How about that? Yeah. And joining me also, Marc Liebman.
Cedric, do you realize what you're getting yourself into?
I do. I'm a bit of a daredevil. So,
and also joining me, very frequent guest, very close friend, Marc Liebman, Navy SAR rescue pilot, U.S. Navy captain, best-selling author, historian. And you know what? He's a real passionate guy. But one of the things that I'm seeing him be passionate about, we're going to let him talk about because he teaches a class on it. Marc, welcome aboard, and let's start talking about a major problem right now in our country.
It's called anti-Semitism, and it has risen its ugly head, much more so than it has since World War II, when we had what most people thought was the peak, which was the Holocaust, and we'll talk about that too a little bit. But I want to talk about what we're going to do is we're going to talk about what the definition is, where we find it, and it's found in some strange places. And then I'm going to go into some of the foundations and what the anti-Semitic tropes are. Those are statements made by many anti-Semites about Jews in the United States as well as the rest of the world. And then hopefully we'll have enough time to do all this.
Well, here's one of the things I want to make a point. If you are anti-Semitic, but also when you start this sort of hate rhetoric, you're dehumanizing. We have dehumanized other races, other religions, other people. When you dehumanize, you fail to communicate, and therefore we're not working together. So my point of this whole discussion is a divided house will not stand. Abraham Lincoln said it. In the Bible, it says it. In the Old Testament, it says it. Even, I think,
in the Continental Congress, they made a flag with it.
Yeah.
And it showed the 13 pieces of an animal, happened to have been a snake, but with each state on it, and it said, a house divided will fail.
Okay. And how do you divide a house? You dehumanize people, you make them a target. If you are a dictator, how do you maintain dictatorial powers? You have to have a great enemy. You dehumanize somebody. We've seen it throughout time. It happens.
It's called divide and conquer.
Exactly. And so we want to bring this nation back together and start healing. And we want to heal in all levels, race relations, whether it's black, whether it's brown, whether it's yellow, whether it's a fat old guy like me, whether it's Jewish. Let's focus on what you teach, Marc.
Okay, so let's start with the basics and the fact that, yes, I'm Jewish, but I identify myself as an American who happens to be of the Jewish faith. Period. End of statement. Okay. I happen to be of German and Spanish ancestry. My wife is Ukrainian and essentially Ukrainian ancestry. And so our ancestry has nothing to do with our identity, and our identity as Americans. I happen to be a naval officer who is an American, so I'm an American naval officer. That is my identity, okay? And nothing else matters. The color of my skin doesn't matter. The color, my religion doesn't matter. My height, my weight, Doesn't matter. I am an American, and we are all Americans, period, end of statement. You don't need an adjective in front of it. Okay? We are Americans. And the one thing that my father told me, who was a combat veteran in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, said, we all bleed the same way. And that's absolutely true. When you're holding a friend who has been wounded, you don't give a crap about how, what color of his skin, where he came from, whatever. He is your wounded comrade, or, and we say in the Navy, your wounded shipmate.
Well,
So,
you've gone after them in the drink many
yeah,
times.
that too. That's, as I used to tell them, I'm trying to keep them from being shark meat. So what is anti-Semitism? So I'm going to give you, I can give you the Oxford definition, which is pretty simple. It's hostility or prejudice to those of us who are Jewish, period, end of statement. There's a government legal definition and the lawyers had to write it out. But the most important part about this is anti-Semitism is a learned belief, and it's usually taught to children by adults or by adults in adult education. And I'm going to get to that because a lot of places it's in our religious schools. So where is it found? It's found in pretty much anywhere, but I'm not saying there's an anti-Semite behind every tree or every signpost, but we have had government agencies and policies that were anti-Semitic. When I first moved to the Dallas area, there are private clubs, golf clubs that I could not join, even though I don't play golf, but assuming that I did because I was Jewish, I mean, that's ridiculous. And this is in the 1990s. We have sports figures and public figures, and I listed a couple of them here who have made recently anti-Semitic statements. Now, some may say that they don't understand what they're saying. I don't buy that. They know exactly what they're saying. And then we have the traditional areas, the radical groups on the right and the left, the KKK, John Birch Society, and all these other things. And what we're seeing manifest in the past 4 or 5 years is anti-Semitism coming out of the universities by college professors who are hiding behind tenure and the First Amendment, which I'm going to get to in a second. Then, of course, it's the PLO, the Muslim Brotherhood, and all those folks. So let's talk about the First Amendment for a second. The first 15 words of the First Amendment was the government shall make no law about the practice of religion. I botched what it exactly says, but the point of the matter is it was written by Alexander Hamilton. It's the first 15 words of the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. And the Supreme Court rulings, and I've written this, put this up here so everybody can understand it. You can see in the blue, speech that incites lawless action, makes threats or false statements of fact, cause you as a citizen or non-citizen to lose your First Amendment protection. Now, that's assuming, of course, that the government chooses to prosecute you. So if you're in a protest and you're yelling from the river to the sea, that's inciting imminent lawless action, and you lose, or you can lose, your First Amendment protection.
Okay, for somebody who's listening and they don't understand what that means from the Jordan River, which is the eastern boundary, correct?
Correct.
To the
current
Mediterranean. Basically, they're saying wipe the Jewish people off the map.
Yes, it goes back to what was promised to the Palestinian who left Israel in 1948, was that we will push the Jews back into the sea. The state of Israel will no longer exist, and we will give you not only your land back that the Jews actually purchased, but we'll also give you their land. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on which side of the coin you are, the state of Israel still exists. So I want to talk a little bit about religion, because a lot of anti-Semitism is found in religious writings and statements. So I'm going to pick on the Catholic Church because growing up and by the way, I want to stop here for a second. I have probably I don't want to use a warped, but an intense view of anti-Semitism because I grew up in central Germany. My father was a career Air Force officer. We moved there in 1949. So I saw and went to school with children of members of the Nazi regime. And I saw the Holocaust in its ugliest thing when the first time I went to Dachau, which was 30 miles from where we were living. This is 1949. I was 4.5 years old. You could still smell the ovens and the death. And it had not been fully cleaned up. In fact, it was being used as a prisoner of war camp for Nazis. But anyway, that's a whole nother story. So my point is, I saw the destruction. I saw the hatred. Many of the kids I went to a Deutsche Kinderschule with, fathers were either Nazis, but had served in the German German army, the Wehrmacht, or the Luftwaffe, and also many of them's fathers died in the war and mothers. So it was a pretty interesting childhood. And then the other thing is the first synagogue to which I started going to Hebrew school with had been used by the Nazis as a pig. The sanctuary had been used as a pigsty. And I have been back to that sanctuary since then. And you can still, on a hot summer day, smell the pigs. But it's now being used as a synagogue in Germany. Anyway, so I want to come back to religion and anti-Semitism being taught in the religious schools. If you are Catholic and you went to catechism or Catholic religious school before 2011, that's 2011, you are taught that Jews are Christ killers. That was part of the liturgy until Pope Benedict the 16th, I believe it's Benedict the 16th, said in 2011 categorically Jews were not responsible for killing Jesus. Now, the historical record proves that, blah, 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 blah. But the point matter is Catholics were taught that Jews were Christ killers. And then right after we moved to Dallas, we were greeted by a statement by Dr. Bailey Smith, the president of the Southern Baptist Convention. And he said, and I highlighted this in yellow, with all due respect to those dear people, he's talking about Jews, my friend, God Almighty does not hear the prayer of a Jew. Really? Let me get this straight. We've been around our religion has been around for 5,844 years as of this year. Christianity has only been around for 2,024 years, if you want to use AD as the start date. And so I think we've been around praying a little longer than most Christians. But the fact of the matter is this is an example of what I call subtle, and not even subtle, but anti-Semitism that's being taught to religious groups. And then the last one,
okay.
Then the last one is the Quran. I have read the Quran in English. I do not read Arabic. I pulled these from a different translation because it's a direct translation by somebody who knew what the heck he was doing. And so these are 5 passages from the Quran that are, while they're not anti-Semitic in because they don't mention Jews, they just mention unbelievers. And we, to a Muslim, are unbelievers, as is all Christians and Buddhists and Shintos and Hindus. Anyway, Jim?
Well, let's go back, if we can, for just a second in history. The Spanish Inquisition was all about the Spanish Catholic Church against Jews. And they were burning Jews at the stake if you didn't renounce your Judish. Back during the Crusades, one of the things that happened is if the Crusaders ran into a Jewish village, guess what they did?
They raised it.
Yeah, they killed everything in sight.
Yep.
So this goes way, way, way back, and it has been used. It has been used by groups to control people. I think that's one of the most important things you got to understand. What difference does it make? It really doesn't, but they used it to incite a riot.
Exactly.
Okay.
So, and you saw it this past fall with the Palestinian protests, mostly on college campuses, that were organized and ostensibly by the PO, but there's now a CIA letter out that was released to the press that says that it was funded and helped, and the organization was helped by, guess what? The Iranians.
Oh, yeah.
So this is not something that is just happens and grows out of the ether. This is organized, planned stuff. So I want to jump forward because anti-Semitism has been around for decades. The Inquisition, as Jim said, officially ended in 1492, but it had been going on since the 1100s. Okay, the Alhambra decrees, which were done by Ferdinand and Isabella, essentially told the Jews either leave or convert or die. Mm-hmm. That was your choice, and that's where the Spanish side of my family came from. And many of them went to the Netherlands, which was then known as the Dutch Republic, and the rest is family history. But the fact of the matter is it's been around for centuries, and it ebbs and flows. So in 1903, a group of Russian, they called themselves patriots, I would not use that word, but wrote a book called The Protocols of the Elders of Zion. And I'm not going to get into all the nuts and bolts of this, But what it was a pamphlet or a booklet that essentially said that Jews were out to take control of the world in the name of Zionism. Well, A, that's not true, Benny, and also B, if you know anything about Zionism as a movement, it was really a movement of immigration of European Jews to the traditional homeland, which some people call the Holy Land, some people call Palestine. Today we call it Israel, and it began in the 1780s, and it basically began to repopulate Palestine with Jews because it had dropped to a very, very small minority in the early 1800s and was slowly growing and the Ottoman Turks who were running this thing, or the rulers of the Ottoman Empire, were adamantly opposed, but they were forced upon, the immigrants were forced upon them by the Western powers. So anyway, this thing was published in 1903. It was distributed all over the world, and it is the basis for a lot of modern anti-Semitism. And one of the more interesting people was a gentleman, he was known as Father Murphy, but that was not his real name. But he began to make radio broadcasts during the 1920s. And he would quote literally every broadcast something from the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. And he was extremely had a large audience, let's put it that way, until he was forced by the church to be taken off the air because what he was saying was definitely not true. So this was also used by the German Nazi Party and the National Socialist Party in the 1920s as part of the basis of their mantra and their doctrine and their beliefs. If you read their political statements from the 1920s, it literally, when you say quotes, it doesn't quote with quote marks, but it quotes from the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. And if you ever see it, if you want to read it, fine, but understand it has no basis in fact. And the authors claim they're Jews, but they're not. And they did not sign this piece, which is another interesting thing.
This is interesting discussion. We're talking about anti-Semitism. We're talking about hatred. We're talking about hate speech. We're talking about a specific group of people being dehumanized. But we have seen this, whether or not it's African Americans, whether or not it's American Indians, whether or not it's Chinese, whether or not it's any number of people. And again, that divides us. So when we come back, we're going to be talking more about how we can work together by understanding these truths. This is Jim Blythe, and I'm here for you. Fairway Independent Mortgage, my company. Mine MLS is 311548. Theirs is 2289. We are an equal opportunity lender, and I specialize in helping the elderly. We'll be right back after these words. This is the Veterans Impact Show. We're here for you. Hey, this is Jim Blythe. We've got a really great discussion going. Cedric, you are an African American and probably one of the most brilliant preachers I've ever heard in my life. And I'm not kidding. You have understood, you have been a victim of racial discrimination. Anti-Semitism, racial discrimination, it's pretty much the same thing, isn't it?
Sure is.
Sure is. How do you feel about what Marc is saying?
Well, I've always been mindful, and that comes down to whether it's race, whether it's gender, prejudices that I have to look at. And if people would take the same mindset, if we looked at everyone as one of God's children, it would make all the difference in the world. We would treat everybody differently. The problem is I tend to separate the two. I consider there's those who are prejudiced and then those who are racist, right? And there is a difference. For the fact of the matter is, prejudice is to prejudge, normally out of ignorance, normally out of something that's been said to you, or even just an emotion. You don't know. You're prejudging. Racism is a decision that I've made, even with the knowledge that I have. I may know that Jim, that Marc are great They have great character. They are great contributors to society. Yet, because you're white, or yet because you're Jewish, or yet because you're Hispanic, or whatever, I just dislike you and I consider you to be less than me. That's racism. That's the act of the anti-Semitism that we're talking about today. The fact of the matter is, as Mark said at the very beginning, it's irrelevant, right? As long as we are adding and being positive members of society, why can't we work together? Why is it that I have brown skin, you have less melanin in your skin than I do, so that makes one of us either better or worse than the other? That's always been my issue.
Yeah.
Let me go back to one thing too that you said, Mark. This is taught to children. I was fortunate in that my mother's father, my grandfather, was raised in a black family in Corsicana because of family things that happened. And so the Coleman family was a part of our family. And they came in the front door. They were just a part of the family like anybody else. The other thing is that my dad got a membership in the Dallas Athletic Country Club. They welcomed, and there were a lot of Jewish members in that country club. And that was probably also the first country club in Dallas that welcomed African Americans.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up knowing, but when back in the 50s, 60s, and early 70s, that didn't happen as terms of African Americans. But one of the things I found, and I want to make a point. I knew a lot of Jewish kids. I went to Temple Teens at Temple Emmanuel with my friends. I met Rabbi Olin. He was a little like, wow, you're here, because you want to be. Jewish people don't proselytize.
Correct.
They never asked me, would you like to become Jewish? Would you like to go through the Jewish classes to learn to be Jewish? No, nobody ever asked me.
Because we don't do that.
Yeah. And then when Sammy Davis Jr. decided to become Jewish, that was a lot. But
and Harry Belafonte, and there's a baseball player that did it. Yeah, it was. I look from my side of the table. It was both. I'm going to use the word humorous in the fact that it made you smile, but it was a revelation.
Yeah.
It was a shock.
Yeah.
So can I continue because I want to.
I'm sorry, but I just want to make that point.
This is good stuff. So anyway, I want to talk about the Holocaust. Iran has taken, or the political leaders in Iran have taken the leadership in denying that the Holocaust ever happened, and of course it's been picked up by anti-Semites all over the world, and you can find all kinds of stuff that the Holocaust deniers have put on the internet, and there's a lot of it, and you read it and I have to laugh for a couple reasons. One, because the Germans kept meticulous records, and I'll show you one in a second.
Yeah.
Two, they left a huge infrastructure. There were 60 some odd concentration camps, of which about a dozen of them were essentially killing machines, and very efficient ones. And the first people who pitched this, what we would call now the neo-Nazis, and it's been also been picked up by the far-right party in Hungary today, which has gotten them in trouble with their NATO allies. But it was first pitched by these fringe groups, and like I said, the Iranians have picked this up. Go to the next slide, Nathan. So this is a copy of Leopold Liebman, and it shows and this is a concentration camp record that's on microfilm, and that's my handwriting on the right. Okay, it gives you the birth date, the day he was born, the year he was born, the month he was born, the city he was born, which is Hadamir, and where he was living when he was captured, which is Karlsruhe, which is a city in central Germany, and that's his address. The date his arrival in Dachau, which was 11 November 1938. Okay, his disposition, that means he was killed, was 24 November, or gassed, to use the other word, in 1938. Now the rest of it is the bottom after that, where I've got the little schooling is a microfilm record. The Germans kept meticulous records of who they killed, both Christians, Jews, gypsies, homosexuals, whatever, in the camps. And they're now all on microfilm. and they're all available for research. I picked this one because I have a relative who's trying to find the records of my father's family that stayed in Germany after World War One, and they're gone. When I say they're gone, they're dead. They died in the camps. And so it was. So if you lived in Munich, it didn't mean you went to Dachau. If you lived in Poland, it didn't mean you went to Auschwitz or Treblinka. It was random. It was basically where they were taking the trains to, and you can read about how Eichmann set up the train schedules to make the most efficient transportation, so that within hours of their arrival in a camp, they were either gassed or sent into slave labor. It was, or within a day or two. I mean, it was an efficient killing machine. So those of you who think this did not happen, okay, there is a lot of other census data, a lot of other empirical data, and witness statements of people who watched it happen, as well as those who confessed to making it happen.
And now, Mark, there's also, we've been to the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem or Tel Aviv, Diane. I don't remember which one. Was it Jerusalem? And there's photographs.
Oh, yeah.
There's photographs.
I grew up with people
evidence.
who had numbers tattooed on their forearms.
Yeah.
And who survived.
We still, very few left.
Both you and Mark know that, we used to say a picture is worth 1,000 words, but now we know that we see things on video that have been captured and pictured, that are recorded, as Mark is showing here. And yet still there's efforts to remove history, actual history, from our books, from our minds. We want to, I love that word, deniers. There are those who want to deny that it actually happened. We cannot erase history. That's one of the biggest issues that we have. We want to ignore what's happened. We want to ignore how people have been treated in the past, as opposed to saying, you know what, let's not only ignore it, not ignore it, let's acknowledge it and ensure that it doesn't happen again. Let's move forward and work together. Divisiveness has become such a tool in not just America, but in the world today. But if those who know the truth will stand on the truth, biblically, what does the Bible say? John 8:32, you shall know the truth and the truth shall make you free.
Free, yes. So I want to go to the three, what I call the ludicrous claims of anti-Semites, and they're repeated ad nauseum. And I want to share some facts. So the first thing, and I'll also share something that happened to me about this, which is kind of humorous. There are a lot of Americans who believe, and people around the world believe, that Jews are only loyal to Israel and won't fight for their country. That's just absolutely not true. Okay, so let me give you some examples. In World War II, about 500,000 Jews, which was a fairly large percentage of the population, joined the U.S. military. In World War I, the number was about 250,000 because the population was smaller and there were less people involved. But on the German side, there was about 300,000 German Jews who fought for Germany. About 100,000 of them died. The reason the records don't exist are because the Nazis destroyed them all. So the other fun fact that I like to toss on the table is that traditionally American Jews are not joiners of the American Armed Forces. This is something that just grates on my nerves, to be admittedly, and it's actually the numbers are actually increasing. But there have been 3,780 medals of honor, which is the nation's highest decoration, awarded. Almost 1%. It's actually just north of 9.9%. of those medals of honor have been awarded to American Jews, and they are Jews who admitted they were Jewish, because during World War II, a lot of American Jews had N on their dog tags, which in the place where it said religion.
Yeah, which means none.
None. My father's has, because I wore his dog tags, or actually have his dog tags. I didn't wear them. It basically says J, and then the later ones he got after Korea, it said H for Hebrew. So it's just absolutely ridiculous that we won't do this. We have joined. I can also give you some interesting people. The founder of the Green Berets, Colonel Aaron Bank, was Jewish. The founder of the Seabees, Admiral Ben Moriel, was Jewish. I can go on and on and on. There are many American Jews who made significant contributions to U.S. military history. And oh, by the way, if you saw the series Masters of the Air, Rosie Rosenthal was a major character in this thing. And besides being a phenomenal bomber pilot who didn't have to join because he was in his 30s when the war broke out, ultimately becomes the prosecutor and built the case against Henry Goering. So the next thing is Jews are always interested in money. So here's the funny part of this is it's true because Jews value education and accomplishment in a capitalist society, and in fact, in any society. And what does that mean? Well, if you value education and accomplishment, we're brought up as being goal-oriented. I used to tell my kids, your job is to go to school, get good grades. My job is to put a roof over your head, food on the table, and clothes on your back. Everything else has to be earned. And for centuries, we were restricted by European societies to certain professions, primarily law, medicine, education, and banking, and trade. But and that's where you find American Jews, British Jews, European Jews focus on. Why? Because we couldn't own land. We could not get into politics. It was the 1860s before British Jews were allowed to run for parliament. Napoleon was the first one to pass laws that said all men are created equal. And he abolished the laws against homosexuality. He abolished the anti-Semitic laws that were on the books in France. He did a whole bunch of things, but it was the 1800s before we began to see Jews coming out of what we used to refer to as shtetl. I want to come back to the first one here because I forgot to say this. So I was working on doing some war planning, which I did a fair amount after the Navy took my toys away from me because I had been promoted I was a senior 05. I was, eligible for 06, and I was doing some war planning, and I happened to be doing it in the European theater operations. And for those of you who don't know, the U.S. government, at least the U.S. Navy, and I'm pretty sure all the other services, constantly revamp their war plans based on changes in intelligence, based on passage of time, changes in alliance. So I'm willing to bet right now there's a bunch of guys in the Pentagon redoing all the war plans against Russia. And I know it's going on for the war plans against China. I won't mention the numbers and all that stuff. So I was sitting there and we were discussing strategy and stuff like this. And my counterpart, my co-team leader, so to speak, says, Marc, if you are given a legal order to carry out an airstrike against Israel, would you do it? What he's asking me is am I loyal as at that time I was a captain select, and am I loyal to the United States of America? I looked at him and I said, are you kidding? And I said, of course I would. And I said, what is behind this question? And that first statement is what was when he finally admitted. So this is what I was taught.
Yeah.
So let me come back to the bottom one, the last one. Jews want to control the world through their influence in banking and finance, law, and media. Well, if anybody who says that immediately shows their ignorance about the world of banking and finance, the world of law, and the media. Yes, Jews are influential. Yes, they do own media companies and law firms and banks. I mean, you have the Rothschilds, and there's a couple other banks that are owned by Jews. The Liebman brothers had one of the largest investment banks in the world. I mean, we've got Jews who are involved in PE firms and joint and all kinds of stuff. But anybody who knows anything about Jews knows that we're not monolithic. The famous thing is you put 10 Jews on a desert island, you need at least 13 synagogues because everyone had to have one that they wouldn't be caught dead in.
Okay. I needed that. How about you, Cedric?
Very good. Pretty good.
One of the things I'd also like to make a point, Dallas, Texas was frequently described as where the East ends and Fort Worth is where the West begins.
Yes.
In Dallas, you had a right. If I say the word Neiman Marcus, everybody, that's one of the greatest high-end retail businesses in the world.
Sackowitz's.
And Sackowitz. Well, let's start with just Dallas. Neiman Marcus, Teich Gettinger, Sanger. Wow. Okay. How many more? We had the largest Jewish community outside of Chicago in the United States.
Yeah,
a lot of time.
in fact, the Jewish community in Dallas is probably top 6, 7 in the United States,
Mhm.
behind New York, Chicago, LA, maybe Philly, maybe DC, but we're definitely in the top 6 or 7. And we have a plethora of synagogues. We have enough so that most of us can.
Well, the other thing too, we've had leadership in Dallas that was Jewish.
Mayors,
Mayors that
council
were
members.
Jewish. We had, matter of fact, Bob Strauss was the actual chairman of the Democratic Party many years ago, and he was a good close friend of my father's, and they did a lot of work together. We had relationships with Jewish community, but there was still that underlying, you can't go to this country club, but you can go to that one. And there's another subtlety here, though, that if we go way back in history, because Jewish people were restricted from owning land, doing a lot of things, they became the merchants. They became the money lenders. One of the things that happened, in my opinion, and why the Spanish Inquisition, why other things, is because they controlled a lot of money, and somebody wanted to break that control and grab that money.
Yeah,
Or
they
stop.
financed Columbus's voyage.
Yeah.
Columbus's navigator was what we refer to as a tribal member. In fact, many of them great navigators from Portugal were Jews, and a lot of the cartographers were Jews. Isabella and Ferdinand's private physician was Jewish. But yes, they were deeply in debt when the Inquisition happened. And in many ways, some people will look at it as a money grab. Understand, in Spain, it was King Carlos, the current king, as soon as he came to power, repealed the Alhambra laws. They were still on the books in Spain, and you could not practice Judaism. I'm going to give you 2 personal stories about this. One is my mother wanted to go research our history, our family history, and we sort of, through records from the Dutch East India Company, managed to find out that they came from Almeria, which made sense because our maiden name was Elmer, and how that came about is another story. So this is the 50s. Franco is in power. So, and Spain was not a member of NATO. So to go into Spain required a fair amount of visas and stuff, like applications and stuff like this. And it was days before computers, so everything was done by mail. You had to go to the embassy. They had to mail it to Madrid, and then Madrid had to approve it and mail it back. And blah, 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 blah. Anyway, so then we had to get permission. Now that we got permission to enter, we had to get permission from the Jesuits, who kept all the records in Almeria. And they have meticulous records, not to the level of detail like what the Nazis did, but they've got a fair amount of records. You can go back into their vaults, and if they'll give you access to them, I don't know if they're online yet, but you can go back and look at them. And that was an interesting evolution in my mother's life to go try it. Now, we didn't find everything we wanted to find, but it was an interesting process. And until that point, until Carlos made his repeal the Alhambra laws, you couldn't practice Judaism in Spain. And in fact, now the Spanish government is welcoming any Jew who can prove their Spanish ancestry, like I can. I can become a Spanish citizen. I just have to apply and provide the proof. So there are some things that are happening that are.
Wait a minute. Can you do kosher paella?
Yes. just don't have to put shrimp in it, or shellfish. So here's a fun story from my past. 1939, late 1939, the war breaks out in Europe. My father's a sophomore in college, and he goes down to what we would call an armed forces. It was Navy recruiting. He wants to be a pilot. He wants to be a naval aviator. He grew up always bicycling over to the New York Navy Yard, Brooklyn Navy Yard. And then he was also there the day Lindbergh took off in 1927. Anyway, so my dad wants to be a naval aviator first. And he goes through it takes the physical, it takes whatever tests they are. He goes there, and there's this chief sitting in front of him and says, the Navy does not take Jews. And so my dad was horrified, and he basically was told to leave. So he goes next door and joins the Army Air Corps, and the rest is history. So fast forward, this is 1939, 1968. Yours truly wants to be a military aviator. I'm going off to college. I have a scholarship
Oh,
from the United States Navy. My first thing my father said is the Navy will never give you one because you're Jewish.
and they gave you one.
Then if I go off to flight school, I didn't find this out until after I got my wings.
Wow.
But it shows you the prejudices that go on that are there. Now, who told this chief petty officer? Because there were Jews in the Navy, throughout the Navy. In fact, the Navy up until the World War I was the choice service, or the service of choice of American Jewry. We had admirals, we had captains, we had the guy who ended flogging, Commodore Uriah P. Levy. He did a whole bunch of other things to change the way the Navy operated. And so the executive officer of the Maine was Adolph Marx. So it's just it was just a ludicrous statement. So,
But Mark, I'd be willing to bet that chief came up with that on his own.
I believe so also.
That was not the thing.
Not
And
Navy policy.
Not the policy. And we had Jewish pilots on the plane. Well, you were on my carrier for a period of time.
So I want to tell Cedric something that he'll make him laugh. So my father flew Martin B-26s in the 34th Bomb Squadron, 17th Bomb Group in North Africa. There was a really interesting group of pilots in this really strange squadron called the 99th Fighter Group.
Oh, yeah.
And they flew escort for my dad's B-26s on their missions over Sicily and southern Italy. And my dad will tell you, to his dying day, one of the reasons that they survived was because of the pilots in the 99th, who were, by the way, flying P-40s at that time. And Cedric is smiling, but those of you who don't know who the 99th is, it's the Tuskegee Airmen.
It's the Tuskegee Airmen.
And one of the men who became a lifelong friend of my father's was 1H Benjamin O. Davis, ultimately the chief of staff of the Air Force. But and when I say lifelong friends, we didn't socialize with him, but my father met him and could talk to him because he would come in and brief. They would brief together, and they flew together. They shared the same officers' club or clubs, and during anyway.
Well, the first black naval aviator to be stationed aboard Jesse Brown, stationed aboard an aircraft carrier, and the guy who was his wingman became his best friend. And
Tom Hudner.
Huh?
Tom Hudner.
Yeah. And let me tell you something. You want to see a terrific movie? Go see that movie I can't think of the name of it, but it was a tremendous movie. And it was a movie about two men.
Yeah, it's about the love of two men. Unfortunately, they focused on the wrong issues, but that's beside the point.
It was two men who were partners in the air.
Yeah, because what the movie did bring out is when you sit in a room like we're supposedly sitting in here, your shipmates, and the color of your skin doesn't matter shit. Pardon my French. It's how good you are in the airplane that counts, and how good you are as a leader and officer. That's what matters.
Yeah, and Jesse Brown was a remarkable one.
Yes,
all right, we're going to be right back after these words. And I want to thank DBTV Network for putting us on Amazon Fire and Roku and Smart TV. We're on at 9 o'clock on Saturday mornings. This program is going to be rebroadcast next week. Please join us. Please be a part of it and share it, because we've got to start pulling this country back together. And the way we do it is we stop the lies, we stop the nonsense, we stop the name calling, we stop referring to people as anything less than, as Cedric says, a child of God. And that's the way it is. And remember, our God is based on your God.
That's right.
Yeah, same guy.
Well, I want to also add that we're going to redo the rejoin, because Cedric's organization has done so much to help us. And Cedric and I have put together, as a team, a really tremendous symposium that's going to be on September the 6th. And, huh?
Make it show.
Oh, okay.
The camera's
My wife's
here.
saying, make it show.
The camera's here.
Okay. You want to know about this, and the dog ain't hunting for some reason. Maybe he can put it up.
Nathan can work his magic later.
Yeah. But we've got a great symposium. If you want to go, either give me a call or get a hold of Healing Thine Heart Ministry, because I got to tell you,
Yeah, let Mark hold it.
yeah, let Mark hold it. This is going to be a great opportunity to learn from really three great men. Dave Carey, a POW in Hanoi for 5.5 years. He wrote the book, The Ways We Choose. He's going to talk about how you choose, and the decisions you make will determine your life. And the POWs from Vietnam have had more success than any other that's ever existed. Also, very dear friend of mine, Bruce Hebel, is talking about forgiving forward. And let me tell you, if you've got a lot of hate, this is what we're talking about. Hate. That's like me drinking poison, wanting you to die because I hate you. Thank you very much, Nathaniel, for getting that up. That's going to be Bruce Hebel. He is an amazing speaker. I have seen people transformed in my home by working with Bruce Hebel. And then the most amazing marriage counselor I've ever seen, Cedric, and his wife, Michelle. They're going to be talking about the importance of the military family and providing tools to make a marriage work. If there was anything that I knew, the military didn't want you to have a wife because they would have issued you one.
Correct.
All right. So we're going to have this symposium. Please call us. You can see it. If you check with Healing Thine Hearts, you checked with me, we will help you get signed up. Free lunch, free deal.
And by the way, if the Navy wanted you to have a wife, they issued you one along with a NATOPS manual. NATOPS manual, those who don't know, is the pilot operating handbook for any Navy aircraft.
Okay.
And it's a standard for safety and operations. But yeah. So my wife will tell you that the first 36 months of our marriage, I was married to a boat and I was only home 6 months.
Oh, man. Actually, I think you were married to a helicopter.
That too.
All right. I think this has been a tremendously important discussion. So please share this. Again, take a look at this. It dispels a lot of things, but the main thing we're saying is we are one nation.
Under God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Amen.
And it's especially true. You can't say, I hate this, I hate that. You may disagree, but as my grandfather used to say, don't ever judge a man till you walk in his moccasins. And let me tell you something. I got a little bit of Cherokee heritage in me. So what does that make me?
An American.
An American. That's right. And I'm an American Navy veteran. I identify with being an American Navy veteran. And
by
Cedric,
the way,
you do too.
Who raised his hand and said, I swear to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States, which, by the way, is about we the people and about equality. So help you God.
Yeah.
Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
Yeah.
So help you God.
I think that the military made a lot of mistakes, but it led the way in desegregation. Eisenhower proposed the first Civil Rights Act. And you know what? He was shot down by a Texas senator who later on made it happen.
So yeah,
Took
credit for it. Yeah.
So here, it's talking about desegregation. One of the things that I thought was really interesting was Eleanor Roosevelt. This is a story about the Tuskegee Airmen. Is Eleanor Roosevelt went down to see the Tuskegee Airmen, which, by the way, it was largely her idea, in many ways, her idea.
Yeah.
Portrayed in that movie.
Yeah. And she goes down there and she says, I want to go fly with these guys. So they started to put a white officer in the front seat. And she said, no, I want to fly. And she pointed to, I don't remember who it is, but he's in the movie, but one of the black instructors. And that was her faith in that these men are just as good as the white guys. I hate to say that. But that's, so again, I tell people, and my son, who's a test pilot, will tell you that when you take off, you can do all the simulations in the world, but when you get into God's wind tunnel, that's the sky. It shows things that you can't simulate. Well, when you sitting in like I said, I talk about this all the time when I talk to people. When you sit in a room like this with 10 or 15, 20, all your fellow naval aviators in your unit, all that matters, and I said this early in this program, is how good you are in the cockpit, how good a leader you are, and how good you do your job. And
That was
everything
it,
else
right?
is academics.
That was it. How well do you do your job? I don't care your color. I had black, white, Asian, Hispanic that worked under me on the ship, and it did not matter what your color was. Honestly, it didn't matter your rank. To be honest, it mattered how diligent you were. We had what was called DSOTs, Daily System Operability Tests. WSOTs, right? Weekly system. If you performed that, you kept your machine running. Everybody could do their job. The ship could operate, and we were good. I don't care about your color. And if we could do that in Joe public communities, in our churches, in our Congress, in our country, we'd be so much better off.
Yeah, I used to tell people who work for me as a consultant is, again, I don't care. All I care about is you do your job, do the best of your ability. Is it legal, ethically, and morally, and is the client happy?
Exactly.
After that, it's academic.
Exactly.
And you can do whatever the hell you want to do when you go home, what you want to do in your house, and it has nothing to do with what language you speak at home, where you came from, blah, 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 blah.
All right, guys, this has been a great program. Please share this program. We want to bring this nation back together. So we close with a prayer. Lord God of the universe, God of our hearts and minds, we turn to you and say thank you for the hedge of protection around our active duty military, our first responders, those men and women who run into the fire instead of away from it. We thank you for our veterans and all of our veterans who are in leadership and are bringing this nation back together, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Amen. So, guys, thank you, Cedric, for being on board.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure.
Mark. Huh?
Talking to point at him. You're a given in this show.
Hey, I got to tell you, it's a great day. Please share us. Please get out there. Please support our efforts to support you. This is Veterans Impact Show. We're here for you.